In the misty valleys of Transylvania, where fog clings to the hills like a nervous guest who doesn't know when to leave, one name echoes through history with a weight both grim and legendary: VLAD the Impaler. To some, he is a national hero, a fierce defender of Wallachia against the rising tide of Ottoman expansion. To others, he is the blood-soaked inspiration for one of literature's most iconic monsters, Dracula. The truth, as it often does, lies in a murky middle ground where fact and fiction blur like a foggy night in the Carpathians. Join me on a long, winding journey through the life of VLAD III, his brutal methods, his historical context, and how a 15th-century Wallachian prince became synonymous with the world's most famous vampire. VLAD III, also known as VLAD Dracula, was born in 1431 in Sighișoara, a picturesque citadel in what is now Romania. The town, with its cobblestone streets, pastel-colored houses, and fortified walls, seems plucked from a medieval fairy tale. But in Vlad's time, it was an outpost in a turbulent world, a place where Saxon merchants and Wallachian peasants coexisted under the shadow of constant conflict. Sighișoara, nestled in the heart of Transylvania, was a cultural and commercial crossroads but also a strategic point on the frontier between Christianity and Islam, where tensions between the Kingdom of Hungary and the Ottoman Empire simmered. The house where Vlad is believed to have been born, now a restaurant with a touch of vampiric theatrics, was then a modest residence of a rising noble family. His father, VLAD II Dracula, was a man of considerable ambition and cunning, a member of the Order of the Dragon, a chivalric society founded by Emperor Sigismund of Luxembourg in 1408. This order, designed to protect Christianity against external threats, particularly the Ottomans, gave VLAD II the nickname Dracula, meaning dragon in Romanian, though it could also be interpreted as devil in certain linguistic contexts. This dual meaning, with its air of mysticism and menace, was a gift to future storytellers, a name seemingly destined to resonate with a sinister echo. Young Vlad, inheriting the patronymic, became Dracula, or Son of the Dragon, a title that carried both prestige and portent. Vlad's childhood was no stroll through a flower-filled meadow. In 1442, at the tender age of 11, he and his younger brother, Radu, nicknamed the Handsome, for reasons chronicles don't fully explain, perhaps his charm, looks, or simply because chroniclers needed a catchy moniker, were sent as hostages to the Ottoman Empire. This practice, common in medieval diplomacy, was a way to ensure the loyalty of vassal rulers. Vlad II, who had sworn allegiance to Sultan Mehmed II to secure his throne in Wallachia, handed over his sons as collateral for his good behavior. Imagine being a child, torn from the wooded hills of Wallachia, the sound of church bells, and local markets, only to be thrust into the opulent but intimidating court of Edirne, the Ottoman capital. Edirne, with its mosaic-laden palaces, gleaming domed mosques, and bustling bazaars filled with spices, silks, and rumors, was a world apart. The Ottoman court was a hub of power, culture, and ambition, but also a place where political intrigue was as common as daily bread. For Vlad and Radu, life as hostages was fraught with tension. They were treated with some respect, befitting their status, but always under the shadow of an implicit threat. Any misstep by their father could mean their death. During his time in the Ottoman court, Vlad received an education that, while rigorous, was hardly warm and welcoming. He learned the art of war, from sword and spear to military strategy, skills the Ottomans taught with surgical precision. He also studied languages, including Turkish and possibly some Arabic, and was schooled in the subtleties of diplomacy, which in the 15th century often meant knowing when to offer a polite smile and when to plan a betrayal. But this education wasn't just academic. It was an immersion in a world where power was the only currency that mattered. Vlad, with his fiery temperament and innate pride, didn't adapt easily to life as a hostage. While Radu, more pliable and charismatic, integrated into the Ottoman court, even forming a close relationship with the young Mehmed, who would later become Mehmed II the Conqueror, Vlad remained aloof, his resentment brewing like a silent storm. Chronicles suggest he was treated harshly at times, perhaps even physically punished, which fueled a deep distrust of the Ottomans and, by extension, anyone who might betray him. This experience, combined with the cultural alienation of being far from home, shaped Vlad into a man whose paranoia and determination would be both his strength and his curse. In 1447, Vlad's fate took an even darker turn. His father, Vlad II, was assassinated on the orders of Vladislav II, a rival backed by the Hungarians seeking control of Wallachia. The murder was brutal, a reminder of the ruthless nature of medieval politics. But the fate of Vlad's older brother Mircea was even more chilling. He was buried alive, a death so cruel that even in an era accustomed to violence, it must have sent shudders. Chronicles don't specify the exact details, but the image of a young noble, heir to a dynasty, buried beneath the earth while still breathing is the kind of horror that lingers in the imagination. Vlad, then just 16, was in the Ottoman court when he received the news, and though sources don't record his reaction, it's easy to imagine the impact. The betrayal and death of his family not only left him orphaned but also reinforced his belief that loyalty was an illusion and power the only security. With the Sultan's support, Vlad reclaimed the Wallachian throne in 1448 at age 17. This first reign was more of a trial run, a brief foray into power that lasted mere months before Vladislav II ousted him. Wallachia at the time was a political quagmire, a mosaic of feuding factions where the boyars, the local nobility, played a constant game of alliances and betrayals. Vlad, young and inexperienced, wasn't ready to navigate this swamp, but his short tenure taught him a valuable lesson. Power isn't given, it's taken. The following years were spent in exile, first in Moldavia under the protection of his cousin Stephen the Great, then in Hungary, where he forged alliances with powerful Hungarians, particularly John Hunyadi, a military leader renowned for his fight against the Ottomans. These years of exile were a period of learning and hardening. Vlad, who had already seen more betrayal and violence than most experience in a lifetime, became a calculating man, one who understood that survival required both cunning and strength. In 1456, backed by the Hungarian king Ladislaus the Posthumous and a small army, Vlad returned to Wallachia and reclaimed the throne for the second time. This time, at 25, he was determined to stay. His childhood as a hostage, the murder of his family, the years of exile, and the lessons of a world where loyalty was as fragile as a spider's web in a storm had shaped him into a man forged by adversity. Wallachia, caught between the Kingdom of Hungary to the north and the Ottoman Empire to the south, was a place where ruling was like walking a tightrope while someone fired arrows. The boyars, with their vast lands and penchant for conspiracy, were a constant threat. The Ottomans, under Mehmed II's leadership, demanded tribute and loyalty, while the Hungarians expected Wallachia to serve as a buffer against Turkish expansion. Vlad, with his Ottoman education and experience in the Hungarian court, was uniquely equipped for this challenge, but also shaped by it in ways that made him singular, even among the rulers of his time. It was during this second reign that Vlad earned his sobriquet, the Impaler. Impalement wasn't his invention. It was a known form of execution in the medieval world, used by both the Ottomans and others across Europe and Asia. But Vlad elevated it to a level of infamy. The technique, for the uninitiated, was as brutal as it sounds. A sharpened stake, usually wooden, was inserted through the victim's body, designed to cause a slow, agonizing death. The stake was placed upright, and the body was displayed in public places, often along roads or in town squares, as a warning to others. Chronicles, though often exaggerated by Vlad's enemies, describe scenes of horror. Rows of stakes with writhing bodies, arranged like a grotesque forest stretching for miles. The numbers vary by source. Some speak of hundreds, others thousands, but the psychological impact of these executions was undeniable. Vlad didn't just kill his enemies. He turned them into a spectacle, a message carved in flesh and bone that no one, absolutely no one, should defy him. One of the most notorious episodes of his reign occurred in 1460, known as the Forest of the Impaled. That year, Mehmed II, the Sultan who had conquered Constantinople 7 years earlier, sent an army to subdue Wallachia. Vlad, who had broken his alliance with the Ottomans and aligned with the Hungarians, refused to pay the annual tribute, an act of defiance tantamount to declaring war. Knowing he couldn't face the Ottoman army in open combat, Vlad adopted guerrilla tactics that would impress any modern strategist. His men attacked at night, burned villages to deny the enemy resources, and ambushed Ottoman patrols in the narrow passes of the Carpathians. But the masterstroke came when he captured thousands of Ottoman soldiers and impaled them along the road to Targovist, Wallachia's capital. Chronicles, though prone to exaggeration, describe a nightmare landscape, a field of stakes, each topped with a decomposing body, stretching to the horizon. When Mehmed and his army arrived, it said the Sultan, horrified, turned back and abandoned the campaign. It's hard to imagine the impact of such a scene on an army accustomed to war. The Ottomans, who had faced all manner of horrors in their conquests, found in Vlad an adversary whose cruelty rivaled their own. But Vlad didn't reserve his wrath solely for the Ottomans. The boyars, Wallachia's nobility, were a constant source of frustration. These aristocrats, rich in land and power, often conspired against princes, switching sides as their interests dictated. Vlad, whose family had been betrayed by these same nobles, had no patience for their games. One of the most famous stories of his reign occurred in 1459, during Easter. Vlad invited hundreds of boyars to a grand banquet at his palace in Targovist, promising a night of feasting and celebration. The nobles, likely expecting a chance to negotiate or conspire, arrived in droves, dressed in their finest. But Vlad had other plans. In the midst of the feast, his soldiers surrounded the hall, locked the doors, and arrested the guests. According to chronicles, many were impaled on the spot, their bodies displayed outside the palace as a warning. Others, less fortunate, were forced to march to the ruins of Poenary Castle, perched on a cliff in the Carpathians, where they worked as slaves to rebuild it. The march, covering dozens of kilometers through rugged terrain, was a punishment in itself, and those who survived faced months of forced labor. This story, though possibly embellished by chroniclers, illustrates Vlad's approach to descent: direct, theatrical, and utterly relentless. The Saxon merchants of Transylvania, who controlled trade in cities like Brasov and Sibiu, also felt Vlad's fury. These Saxons, of German origin, were a prosperous but insular community with privileges granted by Hungarian kings. Vlad, seeking to strengthen Wallachia's economy and reduce its dependence on foreign merchants, imposed strict taxes and regulations that irritated the Saxons. When they protested, Vlad responded with his characteristic blend of diplomacy and violence. On one occasion, he invited a group of merchants to negotiate in Targovist. What followed was no civilized discussion. According to accounts, many ended up impaled, their bodies displayed on the city walls as a message to others. These acts, while effective in consolidating his authority, fueled the Saxons' hostility, who began publishing pamphlets detailing Vlad's atrocities with almost sensationalist zeal. These pamphlets, printed on Gutenberg's newly invented press, spread across Europe, painting Vlad as a bloodthirsty tyrant whose cruelty defied imagination. Yet it would be a mistake to reduce Vlad to a mere monster. The 15th century was an era of brutality, where violence was an accepted tool of governance. Wallachia, caught between two superpowers, was particularly vulnerable. The Ottomans, with their vast army and expansionist ambitions, could crush a small principality like Wallachia in an instant. The Hungarians, though allies, saw Wallachia as a pawn in their own geopolitical game. Vlad, aware of these realities, knew that any sign of weakness could be fatal. His tactics, though extreme, were effective. The Ottomans considered him a serious threat, and the Hungarians, though wary, recognized his value as a bulwark against the Turks. Moreover, some of his actions, like punishing corrupt boyars or protecting peasants from abuses, earned him a degree of popular support. In Wallachia's villages, where nobles often exploited the poor, Vlad was seen as a champion of justice, albeit one whose justice came at a terrifying cost. An anecdote, possibly apocryphal, illustrates this perception. It said Vlad left a golden cup at a public fountain in Targovist, and no one dared steal it for fear of his wrath. This story, though likely exaggerated, reflects Vlad's image as a ruler who imposed order through terror. Yet that same terror meant no one was entirely safe. Peasants might admire his justice but also feared his anger. The boyars, living under the constant threat of a stake, both hated and feared him. Even his allies, like the Hungarians, never fully trusted him, suspecting his loyalty was as volatile as the Carpathian winds. Propaganda played a crucial role in shaping Vlad's image. The Saxons, furious at his trade policies and executions, published pamphlets that exaggerated his atrocities, depicting him as a tyrant who reveled in blood. These documents, printed in German and distributed across Europe, were a mix of truth and sensationalism. One claimed Vlad had impaled 20,000 people in a single instance, a figure that, while improbable, captured readers' imaginations. The Ottomans, too, had reason to demonize him. Vlad was a constant thorn in their side, a ruler who refused to submit and challenged their authority with audacity bordering on madness. These stories, combined with local folklore about vampires and creatures of the night, began weaving a myth that would transcend centuries. This is where the connection to Dracula begins. In 1897, Bram Stoker, an Irishman with a flair for the Gothic, published Dracula, a novel that redefined the vampire concept. Stoker, a theater manager with an interest in folklore, drew inspiration from various sources, including Eastern European legends and Vlad's history. Though he never visited Transylvania, he reportedly stumbled upon the name Dracula in a book about Wallachia, possibly William Wilkinson's history of Wallachia and Moldavia, and was captivated by its sinister resonance. However, Stoker's Dracula is not a direct portrait of Vlad. While Vlad was a warrior prince, a flesh-and-blood man fighting for his people, Count Dracula is an immortal aristocrat living in a crumbling castle, drinking blood and fearing the sun. The connection is more symbolic than literal. The name, the Transylvanian setting, and the aura of terror are the bridges linking the two. Balkan vampire folklore also played a crucial role. In the 15th century, beliefs in vampires, or strigoi in Romania, were common. Strigoi were malevolent spirits that rose from their graves to torment the living, often associated with blood and violent death. People feared the dead returning, taking drastic measures like driving stakes through corpses' hearts, decapitating them, or burning them. These practices, born of fear and superstition, aligned perfectly with Vlad's reputation. His executions, with their stakes and exposed bodies, evoked images of anti-vampire rituals. Moreover, his nickname, Dracul, with its dual meaning of dragon and devil, fueled the popular imagination. As stories about Vlad grew exaggerated, it was easy to imagine him as a supernatural figure, a lord of the night ruling with cruelty and perhaps a touch of dark magic. Vlad's death in 1476, under circumstances still debated today, added more fuel to his myth. Some say he died in battle, fighting the Ottomans or their Wallachian allies. Others suggest he was betrayed by his own men, perhaps weary of his relentless rule. The story of his head being sent to the Sultan as a trophy, though possibly exaggerated, adds a final touch of drama to a life already larger than fiction. What is certain is that, with his death, Vlad left a void that myth quickly filled. In the centuries that followed, Vlad's figure split into two streams. On one hand, there was the historical Vlad, the ruler who defied the Ottomans and kept Wallachia free at a terrible cost. On the other, there was the mythical Vlad, the bloodthirsty tyrant whose exploits grew in the popular imagination. The Saxon pamphlets, with their sensationalist accounts, became a kind of proto-horror literature, captivating European readers with tales of a prince who seemed more demon than man. When 19th-century writers like Stoker began exploring Gothic themes, Vlad was a natural source of inspiration. His life, filled with drama, betrayal, and violence, was perfect material for a horror story. Stoker's Dracula, published at a time when Europe was fascinated by the supernatural, crystallized this transformation. The novel not only created the archetypal vampire, elegant, seductive, yet deadly, but also turned Transylvania into a place of mystery and fear. Crumbling castles, howling wolves, and superstitious villagers became horror genre cliches, and the name Dracula became synonymous with vampirism. Though Stoker took creative liberties, his Dracula retains echoes of Vlad: aristocratic pride, military cunning, and a presence that inspires both fear and fascination. Dracula's impact transcended literature. In the 20th century, Cinema elevated the Count to new heights. Bela Lugosi's 1931 portrayal, with his black cape and hypnotic accent, defined the vampire image for generations. Later films, from Hammer Productions to modern adaptations, continued to explore the myth, sometimes leaning closer to the historical Vlad, other times fully embracing the vampiric fantasy. Each new version added layers to Vlad's legacy, turning him into a cultural icon that transcends time and place. In Romania, the relationship with Vlad and Dracula is complex. For many Romanians, Vlad is a national hero, a symbol of resistance against foreign oppression. His fight against the Ottomans, at a time when Wallachia was a small pawn in a geopolitical chessboard, makes him a figure of pride. Yet the Dracula connection, driven by Western tourism, sometimes causes unease. Modern Romanians have learned to embrace both sides, Vlad as hero and Dracula as a tourism brand. Cities like Sighișoara and Brașov capitalize on the vampiric link, while scholars continue to study the details of his reign, separating fact from myth. Bran Castle, despite its tenuous connection to Vlad, has become the epicenter of Dracula tourism. Built in the 13th century, this stone fortress perched on a cliff looks straight out of a Gothic novel, with its pointed turrets and shadowy corridors. Tourists flock to wander its halls, hear vampire tales, and buy souvenirs. Poenary, on the other hand, is less visited due to its remote location and ruined state, but for history purists, it's a more authentic reminder of the real Vlad. Climbing the 1,480 steps to Poenary is a pilgrimage for devotees, a way to connect with the man behind the myth. Wallachia's economy under Vlad reflected its time. Peasants, the majority of the population, worked the land under the shadow of the boyars, who controlled vast estates. Saxon merchants in cities like Brașov and Sibiu facilitated trade between Wallachia, Transylvania, and beyond. Vlad, aware of trade's importance, sought to strengthen Wallachia's economy but often alienated the very merchants he needed. His strict taxes and intolerance for commercial disloyalty led to conflicts with the Saxons, who responded with a propaganda campaign that amplified his reputation as a tyrant. Daily life in Wallachia under Vlad was a mix of fear and stability. For peasants, Vlad could be a protector. Stories tell of him punishing corrupt nobles who abused the poor, ensuring taxes were fair and crimes punished. Yet that same fear meant no one, from peasants to nobles, was entirely safe. The line between justice and cruelty was thin, and Vlad crossed it often. His executions weren't just punishments. They were spectacles designed to etch his authority into collective memory. Militarily, Vlad was a cunning strategist. His Ottoman education gave him intimate knowledge of their tactics, and he knew he couldn't face them in conventional battle. Instead, he adopted guerrilla warfare, using Wallachia's mountainous terrain to his advantage. His nighttime raids, known as the night attack, were particularly effective. In a famous 1462 incident, Vlad led a surprise assault on an Ottoman camp, causing chaos and significant casualties. Though he couldn't defeat Mehmed II's army outright, these tactics delayed the invasion and bought time to bolster his defenses. Vlad's relationship with Hungary, his nominal ally, was equally complex. The Hungarians, under Matthias Corvinus, saw Wallachia as a buffer against the Ottomans but also as a pawn in their ambitions. Vlad, needing Hungarian support, distrusted their intentions. In 1462, this distrust culminated in his arrest by Matthias, who accused him of treason based on allegedly forged letters suggesting Vlad was negotiating with the Ottomans. Vlad spent several years in Hungarian captivity, a period that, though less documented, must have been a blow to a man accustomed to action. Yet even in confinement, Vlad maintained his aura of danger, and stories about him continued to grow. When released in 1476, Vlad attempted to reclaim Wallachia's throne once more. His third reign was brief and ended with his death in December that year. The exact circumstances remain uncertain. Some say he died in battle, fighting the Ottomans or their Wallachian allies. Others suggest betrayal by his own men, perhaps tired of his relentless rule. The story of his head being sent to the Sultan, preserved in honey as proof of his death, is a macabre detail that fits his life perfectly. Though lacking definitive evidence, it reflects the fascination Vlad inspired, even in death. Wallachian and Transylvanian folklore, rich with tales of Strigoi and other supernatural beings, provided fertile ground for Vlad's transformation into Dracula. Strigoi were not just ghosts but specific entities, often linked to those who died violently or lived sinful lives. Rituals to prevent their return included staking corpses' hearts, decapitating them, or burning them. These practices, grotesque by modern standards, were a logical response to the era's fears. The link between these superstitions and Vlad's executions was inevitable. His stakes, fields of bodies, and reputation for cruelty fit the image of a living Strigoi, a man who seemed to defy human laws. In the 18th century, as European travelers explored the Balkans, stories of Vlad and vampires intertwined further. Saxon accounts, with their sensationalist descriptions of his atrocities, merged with local folklore to create an image of Transylvania as a land of dark magic. Writers like John Polidori, with his 1819 tale The Vampire, and later Stoker, tapped into this fascination, transforming local superstitions into a universal narrative. Stoker's Dracula, with his Carpathian castle and decadent aristocratic aura, is a product of this blend of history and myth. Stoker's novel also reflected its era's anxieties. In the late 19th century, Europe grappled with rapid industrialization, colonialism, and social tensions. Dracula, as a foreign invader threatening civilized England, embodied fears of the unknown, the primitive, and the uncontrollable. Vlad, with his reputation for savagery, was the perfect model for this villain. Yet Stoker also imbued Dracula with a complexity that made him fascinating. Not just a monster but a melancholic being, trapped in eternal existence, craving power and connection. Dracula's success breathed new life into Vlad's myth. In the 20th century, film and television turned the Count into a global icon. Each adaptation, from Lugosi's elegant portrayal to Gary Oldman's romantic 1992 version, added layers to the character. Some films tried to tie Dracula more directly to Vlad, presenting him as a tragic prince turned vampire after personal loss. These interpretations, though not historically accurate, reflect a desire to find humanity in a figure known for inhumanity. In Romania, Vlad's legacy remains contentious. Historians, especially during Nicolae Ceausescu's communist regime, promoted Vlad as a nationalist symbol of resistance. His fight against the Ottomans was portrayed as a precursor to Romania's struggle for independence. Yet the Dracula connection, fueled by Western tourism, sometimes clashed with this narrative. Modern Romanians have embraced both sides, Vlad as hero and Dracula as a tourism brand. Cities like Sighișoara and Brașov capitalize on the vampiric link, while scholars continue to parse fact from myth. Bran Castle, despite its dubious connection to Vlad, has become the epicenter of Dracula tourism. Built in the 13th century, this cliffside stone fortress looks like it stepped out of a Gothic novel, with its pointed turrets and shadowy corridors. Tourists flock to explore its halls, hear vampire tales, and buy souvenirs. Poenary, less visited due to its remote location and ruinous state, remains a more authentic reminder of the real Vlad. Climbing its 1,480 steps is a pilgrimage for devotees, a way to connect with the man behind the myth. Vlad and Dracula's influence extends beyond Romania. In popular culture, the vampire has become a universal archetype, appearing in everything from romantic novels to video games. Dracula's blend of elegance and danger has inspired countless imitations, from Anne Rice's Interview with the Vampire to Stephenie Meyer's Twilight. Yet none of these would exist without Vlad, whose life provided the legend's core. His story is a reminder of how reality can fuel fiction, transforming a flesh-and-blood man into an eternal symbol. To fully understand Vlad, one must explore Wallachia's 15th-century cultural and social context. Religion was central to daily life. Most Wallachians were Orthodox Christians, and the church wielded significant spiritual and political influence. Vlad, though not traditionally devout, used religion to legitimize his rule, presenting himself as a defender of Christianity against the Ottomans, a stance that resonated with his Hungarian allies and peasants who saw the Turks as both a political and spiritual threat. Yet his brutal methods often clashed with Christian ideals of mercy, creating a paradox his enemies exploited to demonize him. Wallachia's economy relied heavily on agriculture and trade. Peasants grew wheat, barley, and other crops in the fertile Danube valleys, while boyars controlled production and distribution. Saxon merchants, with trade networks stretching to Germany and beyond, were vital but also a source of tension. Vlad, seeking to centralize power and reduce noble and foreign merchant influence, implemented unpopular policies. His taxes, meant to fund military campaigns, alienated the Saxons, who responded with a propaganda campaign that amplified his tyrannical reputation. Life in Wallachian villages was harsh but structured. Peasants lived in wooden or adobe homes, often clustered around a church or market. Life revolved around the seasons, planting in spring, harvesting in autumn, and long winters spent by the fire, telling stories. Tales of strigoi and other supernatural beings were common, especially on dark nights when the wind howled through the Carpathians. These superstitions, rooted in centuries of oral tradition, provided fertile ground for Dracula's myth. Vlad's stakes and aura of terror fit perfectly with these beliefs, and it's easy to see why villagers whispered that their prince might be more than human. Militarily, Vlad was a master of asymmetric strategy. His small armies, dwarfed by the Ottomans, were agile and knew the terrain intimately. The Carpathians' narrow passes and dense forests were ideal for ambushes. Vlad also used scorched earth tactics, destroying villages and crops to starve the enemy. These strategies, while effective, came at a high human cost, as Wallachian peasants often suffered as much as the invaders. For Vlad, the ends justified the means. His goal was to keep Wallachia free, and he was willing to pay any price to achieve it. Vlad's relationship with his Hungarian allies was a delicate dance. John Hunyadi, Hungary's regent during Vlad's early years, was a key ally but had his own ambitions. After Hunyadi's death in 1456, Vlad dealt with Matthias Corvinus, Hunyadi's son, who was less reliable. Matthias, a young king focused on consolidating power in Hungary, saw Vlad as a useful but expendable tool. This tension culminated in Vlad's 1462 arrest, a turning point sparked by allegedly forged letters suggesting he was negotiating with the Ottomans. His years in Hungarian captivity, likely in Visegrad fortress, are poorly documented but must have been torturous for a man of action. Yet even in confinement, Vlad's dangerous aura persisted, fueled by Saxon pamphlets and travelers' rumors. When released in 1476, likely as part of a political deal to counter Ottoman influence, Vlad was determined to reclaim his throne. His third reign was brief and tragic, ending with his death in December. Whether he died in battle or was betrayed remains uncertain. The tale of his head being sent to the Sultan, preserved in honey, is a dramatic flourish that suits his larger-than-life story, though evidence is lacking. His death marked the end of an era but the beginning of his legend. Wallachian and Transylvanian folklore, with its strigoi and supernatural tales, provided fertile ground for Dracula's myth. Strigoi were linked to violent deaths or sinful lives, and rituals to prevent their return. Staking hearts, decapitation, burning, mirrored Vlad's executions. His stakes, fields of bodies, and cruel reputation fit the image of a living strigoi, defying human norms.